And here we are. I mean, this whole issue is an elephant in the room, and we're fighting to point to an elephant that's standing there as clear as day. As is the lack of evidence or concern for evidence for what is definitively an essential element of the case. Again, forgive me for. Do you understand what an essential element of a case means? It's a weird phrase, I know.
I've been listening to the show for about 6 months. I've heard this used a lot, and I get the idea. I have the idea that I know what it means, but I also had the idea that I knew what jurisdiction was like an hour ago. So
fair enough. An essential element of not just a legal case, of anything, is a piece that must be true for the whole thing to be true. So
okay.
There are many elements that can be incidental elements. But an essential element is, if you flip that from true to false, nothing else matters. It's like saying every Chinese person in the world is under 6 foot tall. If I find one Chinese person that's 6'1", an essential element has failed. And my assertion itself is wrong. Because I said every. I didn't say most. I didn't say generally. I didn't qualify it. So an essential element of, in the sense of this, let's go ahead and tie it back. If you were to accuse somebody of running a red light and endangering some school children as a result, that's the accusation.
Okay.
One essential element is that the light would have to be on. The light would have to be active. If it's not active, my whole assertion cannot be true. If there aren't any children out on the streets at the time, my assertion can't be true. If I'm not in a car at the time, my assertion can't be true, even if all of the other pieces are true. Those are all three essential elements that I've mentioned. So if a prosecutor were to say to me, we ran a red light and endangered school kids. And I started talking about, all right, what evidence do you have that the light was on? And he said, that's not relevant. I never said anything about a light being on or off. And it's like, wait a minute, that's an essential element of what you accused me of, is that the light has to be working in order for, blah, blah, blah. Or better yet, let's take it back a notch because that's a little too obvious. Let's say I happen to know that there was no school that day, whatever, right? Let's say he said it was kids on their way to school. And I happen to know that there was no school that day, right? So I've identified within myself a failure in his argument. I know one of his essential elements cannot be true. So I start asking, it's like, okay, do you have any evidence to show that school was in session that day? And he says, oh, that has nothing to do with my accusation. Well, yeah, it does, because it has to be true in order for your assertion to be true. Even though it's one step removed, it still has to be true that school was in session. You said kids on their way to school. Even though he didn't directly mention it, it is an essential element. It is implicit in his accusation. It is a necessary implication. He has to drag it along. And he can't denounce it. He can't say, I don't have to prove that the school is in session. Well, if I bring it up, you do. Because the burden isn't on me to prove that you're wrong. The burden's on you to prove that you're right. And so I asked him, what evidence do you have that school was in session that day? And he's going to try to wiggle away because he's like, well, I have evidence that you ran, about a light, and I have evidence about this, and I have evidence that there was a school bus around. Good enough. He'd get a guilty conviction. He'd get a guilty conviction on that because it looks like there would have been school kids around, except for the fact that there wasn't school that day. So that's why we go about saying, well, do you have any evidence of blah, blah, blah? And this is where we are with this jurisdictional stuff. Do you have any evidence that the codes that are written down apply to me? Well, that's not what we're talking about here. The codes, I have evidence that the codes exist. No, that's not the issue at hand. It's one removed from talking about me breaking the law and being disobedient of that code. I'm one step removed in talking about, do you have evidence of jurisdiction? That it is right for you to impose upon me, and in the respect of the essential element of that, which is that the codes apply to me.
He's supposed to allege that the codes do apply in the first place when he brings his case forward, right?
Supposed to means that someone supposes that he did, right? So it is supposed that he alleges that the codes apply. Yes, that is supposed by the people up above him in the chain of judicial command. It is supposed by people on our side of the fence that understand the nature of these things, at least to that point. He probably doesn't even suppose it himself, though, because sometimes if their blinders are on, that's just a gimme. Oh, and the judge might also consider it just a given,